by Chris Lewis, Syeta'xtn, who is a council member and spokesperson for the Squamish Nation. We're very excited to be joined for this talk. It's going to be talking about times of transformation. So I think I'll pass it over to you now, Chris. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can take over.
Great, thank you, Victoria, and Hatsqualtanoyap, Siam, Sioyoqua, Syeta'xtn, Kwashaman Nata Skahotmish Okamilk. Just opening in our language, saying it's great to see each and every one of you respected leaders and honored guests. My ancestral name is Syeta'xtn. My given name is Chris Lewis. I am a council member and a spokesperson for the Squamish Nation. And really just want to thank Graham and Victoria and all of you for allowing me to come here and share a little presentation with you around who the Squamish people are and how we situate ourselves in our history, in our place, and how it relates to all of creation. And I just want to wish you all a happy Earth Day. It's as we celebrate our connection with Mother Earth today and how we're connected with all of creation again. So I will share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I would love to walk all of you through. I am honored by all of your presence here today, and thank you for taking the time out to listen to the few words that have been passed down to me from my ancestors, my teachers, and the things that I've picked up and walked in life with. So thank you very much. I'll go through the presentation, and as Victoria mentioned in the chat, I really want to create a safe spot for everybody to feel free to answer, ask any question that you may have. I'm here really to kind of be a resource for you, to ask any question that you may have of me, and I'll do my best to answer it. I did see my colleague Joyce Williams, fellow colleague on Squamish Council, join as well. I want to put a shout out to that. I just saw her. She's probably somewhere in there. And there she is. Good evening. So I'm honored to be here with my colleague Joyce Williams as well. So I'll share my screen now and we'll jump right in, and then hopefully we have a lot of time for questions at the end, because I would love to have a kind of conversation. So thank you, Victoria. Can everybody see that all right? Victoria, can you put your thumbs up? Thank you. Just gonna make this a little small. First of all, thank you all. Welcome to the Skahotmish Okamilk, the Squamish Nation territory, our homelands, as our elders would say. With all stories and all journeys in our community, our elders remind us that our stories start in the mountains, that we are a mountainous people. We come from the sea to sky corridor. Our territory is from mountain peak to mountain peak in a watershed sense. So, and I'll get a little bit into that, but when we're very young, we are told to kind of go to the mountains to figure out who we want to be and where we come from as Skahotmish people. And then we come out of the mountains no different than a creek and a stream and a river, and go back into our home villages and tell people who we want to be. And sometimes they'll already know that. So this is, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back. I'm just trying to move the screen around here a little bit. This is something that I have incorporated from my grandfather's teachings. The story is that we were driving up the Sea to Sky Highway, and he was telling me that we own all of this. We are a part of this land, that everything of who we are comes from a place, our names, our songs, the gifts that we have. So from the moment we take a breath and enter this world as Skahotmish, we inherit our sacred lands and everything in it. It is a gift that we It is a gift, but it's also a responsibility that we have to take care of it for the future generations. There's that famous native proverb where it's just like, we don't inherit the land and the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So we're deeply interconnected and interdependent on our land and waters. And in our language, we say Chitwa A to T, which means we are here. We are the Squamish, the descendants of the original Squamish, 23 villages and 24 established reserves throughout the watershed of the Squamish River, Mamcombe River, Howe Sound, English Bay, False Creek, Broad Inlet. Our territory extends from the height of land to the ocean. Many of you, if you are in Gibsons, you occupy one of our original origin village of Syeta'xtn, where one of the first Squamish men fell from the sky and landed on his brother's house, and started our great nation. There was many origin villages of our people. One was in the north, one was at Syeta'xtn, and another one was in the heart of Squamish, in Squamish and Stopness, which the Squamish Chief Mountain is there to represent that. And so we come from that deep lineage. But in 1923, after the Indian Act separated us all through separate established Indian reserves, several Squamish communities that all spoke Squamish, and we all kind of came together and joined again and reconstituted our nationhood and amalgamated to become what we now know as the Squamish Nation. And the sole purpose of that is that we were losing land at an unprecedented rate. And it was creating a lot of ill will between villages and relations and families. So the amalgamation just wasn't to amalgamate all of the land and the resources together, but it was also the establishment of good government of the tribe at the time, which is to have the ultimate result of the abolishment of any ill will that has arisen through past transactions or expropriations that happened with the crown governments over the last number of years in the early 1900s. And really to bring about a brotherly feeling among each and every member of the Squamish people. Today, we still govern ourselves with that way through our Squamish Nation Council. We are the second largest First Nations in British Columbia, with just over 4,000 members. Cowichan tribes, which is another amalgamated tribe on Vancouver Island, is a little ahead of us. I think they're about 4,500, coming up to 5,000. And we occupy 9 communities stretching from North Vancouver to Upper Squamish. And as you can see, our territory is roughly about 6,700 square kilometers in size. And we come together tonight to understand the past so that it can inform our present, and we can work together to create a new future. Our mission of the nation is always to protect the amalgamation and the vision of those leaders in 1923 and enhance the village, the Okemilk, the people's values, traditions through respect, equality, and harmony for all. I want to acknowledge and recognize all our past leaders and our present leaders and our staff and our community members that who've helped sustain, grow, and advance the nation. We haven't done it alone. It wasn't on the back of one person or one leader or one council. Our families, our leaders, subsequent councils have all come together to help us to get us to the place we are today. I also want to recognize that a lot of the knowledge that I'll be sharing with you tonight has been passed down by elders that I've had fortunate to know, family members, past leaders, and it's just a small glimpse into the world of the Squamish people. So I'll get a little bit into a timeline. Since the beginning of time, our connection to our land has been strong, but since contact, our connection to our place, our culture has been eroded through federal and provincial legislation, assimilation attempts like the residential school, and the removal of our people from their traditional places on the land and forced into residential schools or into the reserve systems, where sometimes we couldn't leave without permission. At no time during this period did we cease to continue our connection to the land, our economy, and our cultural understanding of who we are as Squamish people. This just kind of tells you a little bit about our governance structure from a traditional sense, that we had systems of protocols and interactions and trading and economy well before contact, that our lands contained permanent villages and meeting places, hunting grounds, gathering places, fishing areas that were both on the land and in the marine environment. And it was very highly structured and organized around family structures and village structures. And that is still true as it was in the past, and it's still true today. As you can see through my timeline here, we have been here since the beginning of time, and I talked a little bit about Syeta'xtn, who fell through the sky and landed on his brother's longhouse and what we now know as Gibsons, which is Syeta'xtn. Our language was very multi-dimensional. We had an introductory language, common language, and a lot of our chiefs and matriarchs would speak more of a higher language to distinguish themselves. Through our many chapters of change, through glaciation and epidemics and all of those, in the beginning, we could communicate with all of creation. We could communicate with animals and water beings and all of those other aspects. It talks about that connection to all of that. And throughout time, there's many chapters of change through our origin stories, that through the Great Flood, we weren't listening to our teachers. We have lost our way. And so the Creator just brought a great flood to kind of basically teach us a lesson. And through that, it taught us that we must come back to our original teachings. And it's no different today. We live in a global pandemic. There's COVID-19 around us, and our elders will remind us of these old stories of the flood and the glaciations and the famines, the time when the salmon didn't come. And the parallel between all of those stories is that we have lost our way as a human society, that we weren't listening and living with the natural rhythm of the land, the waters, and the sea. A lot of our stories and our villages date back over 10,000 years. We were a very wealthy First Nations because we had obsidian quarries out of Mount Garibaldi, or Inchikai as we know it, and it would be traded as far as the interior, British Columbia, up to the north, even down to the south, as far as Portland. We have found remnants of obsidian that had come from Mount Garibaldi as far inland as Alberta, and as far south as Portland, Oregon. Some of our elders tell us that our population at the height was 125,000 Squamish people, and through epidemics, we were decimated. And I think at our lowest population, there was maybe about 300 to 400 Squamish people left. So quite a decimation to our culture and our way of being. A lot of our elders before contact and around that time of contact lived to 120 to 125 years. And as we were a seasonal people, we wouldn't just stay in one spot. We would move with the resources, and we had rights to different villages so that we can go and hunt and fish and gather in different spots throughout our homelands. Before amalgamation, we lived all throughout the lands. As I mentioned, reserves were created, which resulted in less than 1% of our land base. Rail companies acquired Squamish reserves in what we now know as Squamish. Land was just expropriated. We were forcibly removed from villages, which all of that trauma resulted in our leaders kind of coming together to reconstitute our nationhood and bring us back to the Squamish Nation and not be recognized as individual Indian bands. You can see this on the Fraser River, where you have a number of our Stalo relatives, over probably 100 of them on the river, that all speak a similar language, but they're all recognized as, if they ever amalgamated like Squamish did, they would be a force to be reckoned with in the Fraser Valley. So our people have always asserted our own form of governance. So through our amalgamation, the 16 chiefs representing those 24 villages came together and formed its own council and appointed its own chairman to represent them and move forward in that aspect. In the 1960s, 1970s, Pierre Elliott Trudeau filed the white paper, which was really to assimilate all Native people in Canada. In 1970s, we responded in unity with all of our relatives from coast to coast to coast, from Indigenous country, to file our own paper called the Red Paper. Up until that time, it was illegal to hire a lawyer, so we couldn't fight for our land back that we lost at the turn of the century. It wasn't until the late 70s that we could actually hire a lawyer to fight for our land back. So in 1977, we filed the Kitts case, which was our first case. You'll notice that in 1999, that case was settled. It was over 30 years in the courts. Many of you may know that we had our late great chief Syeta'xtn, which is known as Chief Joe Mathias, really was a pioneer and an innovator in terms of First Nations rights in that era, leading up to the 1990s. He was also a leader in creating the BC Treaty process and creating more jurisdiction for the Squamish Nation around property taxes and Aboriginal title and rights. As you can see, in 1999, the Delgamuukw Supreme Court case was also established more tenure on the court case and Aboriginal title. And then in 2001, we developed our Kaitamelk land use plan. And we continued to do more land use aspects because we were starting to see that we were becoming more influential in our territories, and we needed to show the world how we wanted to manage our lands, how we wanted to protect our lands, how we wanted to revitalize our lands, and we needed to kind of put all of our elders' knowledge into a document so that we can show the rest of the world that we're not just trying to assimilate and do things how things have always been done. In 2005, we acquired TFL 38, which was roughly 1/3 of our traditional territory, to ensure that we're starting to control timber and old growth management and forestry management within our territories. So you can kind of see we're starting to assert our jurisdiction everywhere we can and move forward. We start then getting into economic development to kind of figure out how we're going to designate and develop our lands. We've had an urban development team come in to help us plan. And we're really in the notion, when we're thinking of it at Vancouver's perspective, we're really in the notion of city building and moving forward. And then 2010, we all know the Winter Olympics came, and it was a great party. But what happened, the legacy out of that is we really learned how to work with our neighboring First Nations, Lillooet and Pemberton, because we share the territory of Whistler with them, along with our Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh relatives to the south of us and to the east of us. Out of those relationships came even a more powerful aspect where we said, let's start working together on land acquisitions, because we all have the right to jointly kind of cut each other off or choke each other out in terms of the land question. But let's, like we did in the past, we can share it and share the benefits of that. So we now have over 160 acres of prime real estate in Vancouver worth over $2 billion that's shared by the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh nations. and we continue to negotiate further lands. As I mentioned, we're just over 4,000 members. About 1,600, 1,700 that live on the North Shore. 400 to 600 members live in the Squamish Valley. Again, we're still doing those seasonal rounds. People go up and down. And then roughly half of our members are officer. A little bit about our governance and our values. This comes right from our strategic plan. It provides a clear compass in terms of decision makings around these values. Okamilk really means like we need to keep the people, the village, the houses, the inhabitants in mind. It's not just about our families, our own communities, it's about the nation as a whole. Stomilk really is, my grandfather always used to call me Stomilk, which means I am connected to the land. I am a human being that is no different from any other being within our territories. So the word Stomilk really means the person and that connection to all of creation. Nukhnelk really means the advice, the teachings, the upbringings, the instructions, and the ways and how we provide, like how we conduct ourselves. That how you conduct yourself and present yourself really reflects not only on you, but your family and your community in your village. So you always need to ensure that you have good teachings and provide good advice. Winalks is always treat people with respect, believe them, respect them, honor people, and empower people. Syeta'xtn, which is really an area belonging to a Syam. A Syam is kind of a highly respected person, or in a English term, I guess we would say it's a chief. And there's responsibilities, like we don't have a real in a Squamish sense, we don't have a real concept of ownership, or in a kind of a capitalistic Eurocentric kind of view. We would call it a Syeta'xtn, is that there's an area that belongs to a family, it belongs to a chief, but with that belonging, it comes a responsibility to take care of that area and to take care of the people in it. There's a reason why when we go to other territories, we thank those people for allowing us to be on their lands. With that reciprocity and with that thanks, it's also their responsibility to take care of us while we're visitors on someone else's lands. No different for the Squamish people. When visitors are here, we have a responsibility to take care of them. In the old days, if somebody was harmed on our watch, it was almost an act of war. So if somebody came as a visitor and they were in peace and they got hurt or harmed or even killed, that it could quickly lead into warfare. So really there was a lot of responsibility on the chief and the families, and everybody had to play a role to play in terms of that responsibility relating to that connection and that belonging to land and waters. And then Snawyeth is basically your teachings, your cultural knowledge and your traditions and your resilience and how you conduct yourself. So as leaders, I know my relative, my cousin Joyce is on the line. When we're making decisions as it pertains to anything as a Squamish people, we base it on this compass and these teachings. Does it hit all of these things? Are we doing things in the proper way? Just a picture of our chief, Chief Joe Capilano, that went to England in 1906 to implore the crown at the time to give the land back, and he's right in the center here with the hat on. And there's a number of other British Columbia chiefs from the interior and Vancouver Island that accompanied him to speak to the chief, or to speak to the king. And then quickly by 1924, it was no longer legal to gather to discuss politics. And we were persecuted if we were gathering to discuss politics with other tribes or ourselves. We'd go to jail. Just a picture of the amalgamation, kind of talked a little bit about this and the concerns arising amongst our Squamish peoples. The amalgamation took 8 years of negotiation amongst our 16 hereditary chiefs to kind of come to an agreement. The headmen as well of the community also signed the document. Hence, the headman of each family was there. In those times, it was very patriarchal. The Indian Act was the woman at that time didn't have a vote. So when you look at the amalgamation document, you will only see the males that signed the document. And all of those times have changed now. So you can see our governance structure from 1923 to 1981. We ran, the hereditary chiefs largely occupied our council. And then in 1981, we changed our election system under the Indian Act to then elect 16 councillors, and the hereditary chiefs would have to run in those elections. So it changed a little bit in terms of how we governed ourselves. There are 4-year election cycles, 16 council members are elected. This year we'll be going to the polls in September. We're cutting our council in half from 16 to 8 as a result of another election and referendum law that was passed by the people to cut that number down from 16 to 8. So it will change again. So if I present this to you in a year time, it might be changed. So the first order of business that Joyce and I do when we enter council is we elect our 2 co-chairs, and then we also elect 2 political spokespersons, and I've had the honor to be a spokesperson this term along with last term. Our members also elect a band manager, which is more of a community ombudsman that helps navigate individual members and families through the elaborate governance systems that we have created over the last 100 years. We also have 2 managing directors that managing our program service and intergovernmental relations and natural resources. And our mandate for our council comes from our people. And we're a consensus-based people, and all of our land is held in common. Just a picture of our council members here. You can see that there's very little gray hair in this picture. Very young council, our youngest council in our history, which I'm very proud of, and our community is very proud of. And we have 1 hereditary chief, Chief Ian Campbell, Huluk Septiosium, and then we have 2 political spokespersons along with 2 co-chairs. Our co-chairs are Joshua Joseph and Kristen Rivers. And then we also have our council members here, and we can go through that. We tend to meet with our people. Prior to COVID, we used to have 4 people's assemblies. They're more like kind of town halls. And then we also have weekly council meetings. So we meet about 43 times a year, our weekly throughout the year as a council. And then we also have roughly another 47 special meetings that council has to deal with, along with anywhere from 60 to 100 community events that we tend to, and people expect us to attend to. And then these are numbers from a few years back in terms of the amount of business that we do on an annual given year. So our future growth as a nation depends on our people today giving rise to the hopes and visions of tomorrow. Just a little bit of our governance structure here. So we have a managing director of nation services, and you can see that we're in charge of children and family, language and culture, which is a new department, Squamish Valley operations, education, employment and training, health services, and member services. And then on the other side, there's administrative operations, which we have HR, administration, finance and IT, community operations, planning, capital projects, rights and title. And then we also have two arm's length organizations, which is our Inchikai Economic Development Corporation, which is relatively new. It's 2 years old, and it deals with real estate and land development, our forestry company, our marinas, our joint venture partnerships, our retail, small business, our RV park. And then we have our HEM Housing Society, which is about a year old, and it also deals with our on-reserve housing for our members, and manages many of our complexes within our community. As you can all appreciate, the Squamish Nation territory is overlaid with many First Nations, city, municipal, and regional boundaries, and you can see this map. We are interconnected and interrelated on a governance and a government scale with 18 other municipalities and jurisdictions. And then we also have our relatives, the Syeta'xtn, to the northwest of us. And we have the Liwat to the north. We have the Tsleil-Waututh to the east, and we have the Musqueam to the south. So we have there's about 22 government relations aspects that we need to deal with on top of the federal and provincial government. So it's quite a complex and busy territory. But we have many protocols and agreements that allow us to find a pathway through the complexities of lines on a map, I guess you would say, and who has jurisdiction over what. So you can see there's a number of protocol agreements here that we have signed with Syeta'xtn and Liwat and West Vancouver, Squamish Lillooet District, Town of Gibsons, Tsleil-Waututh, North Vancouver, District of North Vancouver, Squamish, City of Vancouver, the Vancouver Aquarium, and our MST protocol working group, our protocol signed in 2014, along with another reconciliation with City of Vancouver, and then also a BC Hydro agreement in 2007. These are just a few of them. I was kind of running out of space, but we also have more, but all of this is getting reviewed as we look at the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and how some of these agreements, if you look at our agreement with Syeta'xtn, that goes back to 1994. So like, how do we start looking at it from a 2021, 2022 lens? And this is a picture of our Squamish leadership with our Musqueam leadership and Tsleil-Waututh leadership back in 2014. And I won't be remiss, because I know the Sunshine Coast Regional District wants a protocol with the nation, and it's on our radar. And I keep saying that, but I know my friends are on the call, and you are on the list. You're near the top. So a little bit of strategy, because we're all here to kind of talk about, you know, marine. How does the nation relay itself to our vision around our waters and our lands? So when we think about it, my son is 2 years old, so I think about if my son was born 2 years ago or born today, I want them to walk with guidance, confidence, and support, and identify and live with independence in the life that they choose, with the language, with the culture that is reflected around them anywhere within our homelands and our territory. So really our goal is, within a generation, the Squamish people, that every Squamish person understands that they come from a place, they come from the land, they come from the water. Our vision for the future of our land and our water is for all of us to understand the value of our land and water, and how we use, steward, and connect to the water. We will hold all of our guests in all of the myriad of jurisdictions within our homelands and waters responsible for the continued stewardship of that. And you can see that as we put the revitalization of Atkatsum at the top of our our agenda for the last 30, 40 years, I would say, where the work of the nation working with NGOs and citizen science and Department of Fisheries and Oceans start tackling kind of, the harmful impacts that the sound was looking at around Britannia mines and how we move forward. And really, as a nation, we will continue to revitalize and use our land. We can't go anywhere. We can't move anywhere else. We are from here, and we continue to tell all levels of government that. Our priorities is naming and recognition on the land. You can see that on the Sea to Sky corridor, where every creek that you pass over is named. And whenever we can state the traditional names of the places and the stories of the families that came from those places, and the importance of the language is critical in terms of how we move forward. And the reason I state that, and we state that as a nation, is because those place names tell us how our people used to use the land 100 to 200 to 300 to 400 to 1,000 years ago. And I think the notion of tackling climate change and all these other things is kind of to learn how our Indigenous ancestors were utilizing the land and hopefully getting back to that place. Number two, and many of you on the call that have heard me talk before have heard me talk about our land and our marine use plan in developing policies and environmental management plans to take care of our territories. We continue to kind of look at what we have done in the past around our current land use plan of Kaitamelk. We look to see what our relatives have done up on the coast around the Great Bear Rainforest and the marine use plans that they have organized in their homelands, and look at all of this. The reason why these plans and policies are so critical is because we need to find that baseline. We need to establish the baseline around where we're at so that we know where we're going. We need to understand what is the tipping point, because we all know that people want to develop our lands. If it's real estate development, if it's big developments, LNG, there's Burnco, there's all these other plans throughout our territory. And the nation really wants to establish our plans with all of you so that we can start protecting the last intact ecosystems throughout our territory so that they can start expanding. You can see the work that we've done with Dakota Ridge in terms of protecting some of the last old growth stands up on the hill. We continue to do that because we know that those places are very important to our culture and our spirituality, to our medicinal gatherers, to our hunters, to our spiritual and medicine people, and we need to have those areas protected. And as I mentioned, the land and water to us is spiritual. It's a person just like us, and we need to share some of those spiritual aspects in our relationships to the land so that our young people and our visitors understand these things, and that the land and water have human-like qualities, and we need to treat them like that. We need to treat the salmon like people. We have a Sokwe, a salmon story that talks about when the salmon didn't return and the protocols that we had to learn amongst our salmon people so that they continue to give themselves every 4 years and come back every year to feed the people. And all of this creates opportunities for our people to relearn and visit and connect with our territory, our maps, and through hopefully books and connections and really, again, like my grandfather told me when I was a young boy, take back that ownership and that responsibility of the land and the water, and really focus on sharing this knowledge with all of you, all of our people, and all of our staff, and really to take pride in our community, take pride in who we are, that we are a rich people, that we are very fortunate to be in the time, the place of where we're at. This is a statement that our council developed in terms of our external relationships. And I always like to share this because I think it really shows kind of where we need to go in this era of reconciliation and how we move forward. It's building on the current and past protocols and relationship agreements. The Squamish Nation will strive towards a nation-to-nation relationship with all levels of government, including First Nations and non-First Nations, that's based on mutual respect, collaboration, equality, and meaningful engagement. This relationship will be based on joint decision-making and measurable commitments that will move beyond a paternalistic and tokenistic relationship that builds on the Truth and Reconciliation, the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but most importantly, moving forward to be an inclusive of all ethnic and societal groups and institutions, because in the end, we are all one. This is my last slide, and to get back to that story of my grandfather, I was talking to him when, again, we're driving up the Sea to Sky corridor, looking at Chuckwinelch, which is Gambier, and the Great Ocean, the Salish Sea, and at Catsum. And he said, grandson, he's just like, Chief Joe Mathias and the leaders before you have battled to get into the negotiating rooms. They kicked the door in, their battle was very, very political and very public. And he goes, that battle has allowed you to sit in the rooms that you're in today in the political arenas. And he goes, your challenge now is to change the rules in the legal system and the boardrooms. But what I've learned through that story is that a lot of these conversations happen behind closed doors. They're confidential. The public doesn't see it. And my vision for tomorrow is that we need to blast open the doors for our communities, our collective communities, to see and witness the great work that we are all doing and witness the generations of effort that have come before us. Because we all need to see that, and we all need to pick up the torch for the betterment of our land and our waters and the air that we breathe. So with that, Tamont Quitsi, Snachum, those are my words. Thank you. So Victoria, we can open it up to questions.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think we should open up the questions, open up the floor to everyone. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat, or if you'd rather ask it over just with your voice, you can put an X in the chat to unmute yourself as well. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing all of that knowledge with us and all of that history. I feel very grateful to have been here for your talk today. Wonderful. So we'll give everyone a second. If you have a question, type it on in the chat. If not, I'm sure me and Graham have lots.
And if I didn't cover something that you wanted to know, please ask it. Like, I want to create a safe spot for all of you. So if I didn't cover something that you were dying to know, ask it. I'll do my best to answer it.
I have a question, if that's okay, while we're waiting for other folks to ask, and I'm just going to ask it here. My question is about environmental movements and the roles that settler folks have in ensuring that there is Indigenous consent when looking to protect environmental land. And I'd like to just kind of pull an example from the current Fairy Creek blockade that is a settler-led initiative over on Pacheedaht territory. And there's been a lot of talk surrounding the consent from the nation for those folks to be in that area. So I'm wondering if you have any knowledge to share with us on that, or any additional resources for us to look into.
So I think just around the environmental movement, if it's climate change or if it's protecting some last stands of old growth or bear dens, it's really important to get the First Nations involved very early. We say that all the time to every level of government. If it's the federal government, the provincial government, or a municipality or a regional district, is like, if you can get us involved very early on, the values tend to align. It's just how do we take those values that I talked about and apply it in this context, and ensure that we're not just using First Nations rights just to protect something, then to alienate them from it. A prime example, I think, that as a leader I struggle with sometimes is fisheries protections and fishery closures. If it's glass sponge reefs, if it's marine protected areas, because what happens is if I agree as a leader to those things, I then have to tell my fishermen and my gatherers that they can't go there. And it's a direct infringement on their right to harvest aquatic resources from our waters. And they'll say, Chris, it wasn't our fault that the commercial fishery decimated everything in our waters. And now we have to pay for it. And you're telling me another place I can't go fish, you know? So it's the balance. There must be a balance there around how do we protect things, but we don't infringe on that Aboriginal right. And how do we find a balance in it? Because I find when conversations happen, we tend to get to a balance very quickly. And you can see that throughout Squamish Nation territory, where we have protected a lot of alpine meadows, a lot of old growth forest, some of the last stands. We've created conservancies with the provincial government, and changed our forestry practices to put buffers around creeks and streams, because we were just plugging up the rivers and plugging up the spawning grounds because we were just clear cutting, and we witnessed clear cutting for the last 100 years. To start changing those practices so that we're actually giving a hand, but that we're creating some sort of economy as well. So I think there's just a balance there. So thank you, Victoria.
Wonderful. Thank you for that insight. I guess me and Graham can read out some other questions in the chat. Donna McMahon has asked, how can we initiate some renaming conversations in the SCRD?
You can reach out to the nation through me or Joyce. We have a language and culture department that deals strictly with naming and recognition, so that we're spelling names correctly and we're pronouncing them correctly, and that we're using the ones that is culturally appropriate. So they have elders advisory committee that helps the elders advise our language and culture department to pick the appropriate name. And sometimes a place might not have a name, but we use the same principles on how our people used to name things and just name it in a modern context, which is actually quite innovative and showcases that our culture and our language isn't static. It's not like we're stuck in time. So we can continue to evolve and be very innovative, and that's also very exciting. So we're always open to that. If you called me and said, Chris, I want to name something, like we want to find a Squamish name for something, we're inundated with that stuff. So I would love if you're thinking of a renaming project for the regional district, would be wholeheartedly open to it, because it opens up a whole lens of history in terms of how the nation used to use those lands historically. And sometimes it's real simple, like the city of Vancouver is known to the Squamish people as Come Alive. which means the place of giant maple trees. And it's funny, you look at it, it's the place of giant cement and iron trees now, right? Like it's just, but it tells a story of what was once there before a great city. So in our history is your history because you lived there as well. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Chris. Our next question comes from Ruth Simons, who you may know, and she says, "Hi, Chris, thank you. With the reduction in council members from 16 to 8, can you share more about how the entire territory will continue to be represented?"
Absolutely. So what's interesting about the from 16 to 8 councillors is right now all 16 councillors, when you get elected, you represent the nation as a whole. Like you have to protect the amalgamation, and you have to, when you're making decisions, you have to move beyond your family and your village and your community aspect and think of not just yourself, your family and village, but the entire nation. And all 16 have to do that. What's interesting with this new election reform is that the nation is going to be, half the councillors for them are going to be councillors at large, like what Joyce and I are right now, like what you kind of are standard to. The members will then elect a chairperson, so council will no longer elect that chairperson. It'll be the people. And then the members and citizens of Squamish Valley will elect a representative from the Squamish Valley. So there'll be a rep that represents that constituency. And then from the North Shore, as you can see, there's a big population on the North Shore. The North Shore population will elect a councillor to represent their interests in kind of like a ward system. And then our off-reserve members will also elect a councillor to represent the off-reserve members. So what we're trying to do is like look at ensuring that those regions that have big populations are going to have at least one rep that are going to be keeping their interest in mind. So it'll be very interesting in terms of how we move forward. So good question, Ruth. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. We also have a question from Pam Robertson, who's on our board here at NESMEC and who's wonderful. Pam says, "Hi, Chris. Thank you for taking this time with us tonight. I'm wondering if the nation is thinking of establishing a vibrant physical presence in the Gibsons area, as you have in Squamish and on the North Shore."
Yes, absolutely. As many of you may have recalled, we had this big economic development plan for our waterfront in our Gibsons Reserve, and that we were going to develop the waterfront of the reserve. And that was going to generate revenues for us to put infrastructure into the upper reserve so that we can start building homes for our people. So that vision hasn't gone anywhere. I think we're still thinking about that. I think our members are thinking, you know, maybe I want to live on waterfront property and stuff. So the plan might change because it's quite old now, and the market has changed as well, and our relationships have changed. So I think it'll be but there's very much connection with some of our families that they'll say, we want to move home and we want to move back to Gibsons, where, you know, my name comes from, where, you know, our family once lived. So there's a lot of excitement, especially as a city like Vancouver and North Vancouver, North Shore kind of grows up around us and traffic gets bad. We're already seeing a little bit of an exodus of our elders and our semi-retired folks moving to the coast, which is good. And when you get that migration, I guess you would say, they're now saying, when are you putting services on the reserve? Because we want to move to the reserve. So I would say that plan, like most things, is probably about 5 years out, because we're dealing with our big ECDEV projects underneath the Broad Street Bridge right now and all of those types of things. So yeah, great question, Pam. I would love to live there. It's a great place.
Okay, we have, we're conscious of time, so we can answer one or two or more questions. There's a question here from Mark Hiltz. Thank you, Chris, for the words. I'm interested in hearing more about the Dakota Bowl Agreement, how it came about.
The Dakota Bowl Agreement. It's interesting because we own our own forestry company. We are in the business of like economic development around forestry. So we deal with BC timber sales quite a bit. We deal with the province quite a bit in terms of land tenure as well. And there was a lot of discussion around Dakota Bowl. And it became very much an environmental community movement along with our community members and all of those other aspects. But we had a conversation also with our relatives, the Shuswap, the seashell people, because when we start talking about Mount Elephant Stone and all of those other areas that were highly contentious at the time, it transcended our boundary of Roberts Creek, which we know as Spelkaya. And when we met with our Shuswap relatives, our principles were the same. We knew the significance of the areas. We knew the significance of old growth and the headwaters and the subalpine and the importance of yellow cedar that grows at that elevation. And so we start thinking about, okay, we need to start singing the same song with the province and BC timber sales. And then we also need to kind of tell them what we've done in Squamish Valley proper and other places around protecting stands, and kind of give them a roadmap and kind of say, look what you did over here, why can't you do it here? And kind of just give them kind of the playbook, the Squamish playbook, and kind of say, here's some options. And kind of not wait for government or BC timber sales or other people to kind of tell us what to do. The nation just asserted kind of what we wanted to happen. And then really via osmosis, it kind of, light bulbs go on. Sometimes it takes a long time and sometimes it takes a lot of citizen pressure, but it happened. So that's kind of what I can divulge on that one.
Well, we have two more questions. Maybe we'll end it at that, and I would have a final question I'd like to put in, because these questions will take a little bit to answer, and they're from our staff team. I will be transparent there, but we've been excited to hear from you, Chris. So Matt McLean, who works with us and with the District of Seashell, asked a really important question, which I think would tie into one of mine, which is, how can we help the Squamish Nation have a presence here in what we call Gibsons? And Matt's question is, given the really significant history of Chickwell, which I probably don't pronounce properly, how could we settlers recognize that better?
I think it starts with that naming and recognition, and recognizing and learning that history of that parcel of land, and how we move forward. And really kind of continuing to kind of reach out. I know the mayor and council of the township of Gibsons continues to reach out to myself and my colleagues to kind of say, hey, like, we want you over. There was a whole bunch of great things planned prior to the pandemic that we were going to do, and it all kind of gets shelved for like a year. There's a whole notion of naming and recognition that not only yourselves are thinking about, but I know that the mayor and council are thinking about. And I think also kind of that reminder to your mayor and council, like, hey, like, we should ensure that we're incorporating kind of Squamish culture and the place names and all of those other aspects. And also, we need to start thinking about, like, what does our protocol and relationship look like if it's with the regional district, or if it's with the township of Gibsons, in terms of future kind of land use planning and community planning around, because that can be a very point of contention. And I've witnessed it with other municipalities, not saying I've witnessed it with Gibsons or the Sunshine Coast Regional District, but it tends to be a point of contention between Indigenous municipal relations. And the more we can kind of do front end relationship work and protocol work to kind of showcase how things are going to get done, the easier it will be for when the nation's ready to establish a bigger presence on the coast, that those mechanisms and relationships are in place, rather than the nation saying, coming over and saying, this is what we're doing, we need water, we need services, we need all of this. And you know, if I was the mayor, I'd be like, whoa, 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 you know, like this is going to cost like how much? And then you're already in a kind of confrontational aspect, right? Like, so as much as we can tackle all of those issues, because I know with our reserve of Chuck West, the water comes from the regional district, but the rest of the services come from the township of Gibsons. So it's not just a bilateral relationship there, it's a trilateral relationship that we have to establish in terms of establishing Squamish presence back in that piece of land. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Our last question comes from Emily Cook, another one of our staff members here. Emily says, hi, Chris. I have felt that there should be a way for property owners living on Indigenous land to make an acknowledgement of this, financially or otherwise, on the annual basis to the nation whose lands they are living on. What are your thoughts on this? Is this something discussed politically?
Wow, I've never heard that before. So great idea. I had the similar question in the district of West Vancouver, but it was asked a little differently. The notion of title is much like layers in the sand. Like if you cut the layers and you can kind of see like the clay layer and all the different layers of rock underneath your house. And I always tell people when I draw that diagram, I said there's the Indigenous layer at the bottom, and then there's this unsettled kind of federal crown layer, provincial crown layer, municipal or regional district layer that's all on top, and then your individual layer, like as an individual person, you own this little parcel of land. And I was like, there's all of those layers underneath your house. And I was just like, the provincial and the federal government protect your interests from the nation's interest and need to reconcile that interest. So under the BC treaty process and the land negotiations process, private land is not on the table in terms of negotiations. The only land on the table is crown lands, hence why crown lands held by the province or the federal government are. And so we tend to focus a lot of our energy on that. But this whole notion of reconciliation around homeowners kind of chipping in, it would be an interesting conversation. Yeah, that's all I can say, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you, Chris, so much for your time and your knowledge, and just being so willing to share with us this evening. I'm going to share my screen to our last slide in our presentation here. We want to thank everyone for joining us, and Chris, I hope you can take the time to look in the chat. Lots of people have said thank you and have some really great reflections from the evening. Additionally, I will put a few links in the chat for folks. We would love for you folks to sign up for our newsletter. If you sign up for our newsletter, you can stay up to date with any events that we'll be running here. Additionally, there is also a link there to our YouTube channel. And so we've recorded this talk and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel in the next few days. If you are a social media person, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook for updates on the center as well. Thank you so much, Chris, for everything. We are very, very grateful for building this relationship and for being able to listen to all the knowledge you shared with us tonight. We would love to give you and your family an annual pass to our Marine Education Center. So we can connect more further over email to discuss that, but we hope that you come in for a visit when it's safe to do so. And then, wonderful. Yeah, if you have any other closing remarks, feel free to go ahead.
Yes, again, thank you to each and every one of you for honoring me with your presence. I feel very humbled and honored to have shared a little bit of my teachings and kind of what I picked up as knowledge along my young life to share with all of you. And I hope I created a room of, I hope you all take away something from this presentation and have learned something tonight, and also continue to kind of ask questions and support kind of our collective relationship as we're all here to stay. And you know, it's our responsibility to create a better future for the next generation coming forward. So again, I'm just humbled by the presence, and for all of you being here, I appreciate it, and I hope you did as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Graham, do you have anything else to add?
It's just thank you to everyone who showed up and participated and shared this event with their friends this evening, right? The more chances we have to have conversations where we learn about our Indigenous nation neighbors and get to kind of change our viewpoints, because it's built in structurally from a very young age, our understandings. I learned today that Indigenous people weren't allowed to hire a lawyer. I mean, like, you know, it's crazy for me to try to come to terms with all that, but it's definitely a responsibility of my generation living on this land to inform ourselves and educate ourselves. And if people aren't aware, the University of Alberta has a free Indigenous Canada course that you can sign up with, and it takes you through 12 weeks of incredible information that will change the way you look at the world and look at being a Canadian. That's what I got to say about that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you all again so much for joining us. Thanks again, Chris. I think I'll stop the recording now and we can call it an evening. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, folks.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Chris. I'll follow up more with you via email.
Are we good?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay. Have
Bye,
a great week, everybody. Take care.
Good to end this chat. Have a good weekend.